On the 5th of June 2026, the legal team of Nnamdi Kanu filed their full brief of argument at the Court of Appeal in Abuja. The brief challenges a life sentence handed down in November 2025 on 7 counts of terrorism. Kanu is currently in Sokoto Prison, over 700 kilometers from his lawyers, his family, and the court where his fate will be decided. That same week, Sheikh Gumi, a man whom a human rights lawyer has publicly argued should face a minimum of 20 years imprisonment under Nigeria's own Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act, held a press conference in Kaduna. He was not in handcuffs, he was not answering to any court. He issued legal threats against journalists and walked out a free man. Both men have been publicly accused of inciting violence. Both men have been linked by credible voices to groups responsible for deaths on Nigerian soil. Both men operate in the same legal system, under the same constitution, prosecuted or not prosecuted by the same federal government. One of them is in a maximum security prison 700 kilometers from his lawyers, appealing a life sentence. The other just threatened to sue his critics. So here is the question nobody in power wants to answer directly. Is Nigerian law the same law for every Nigerian? Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Insight Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. Let us be precise about who these two men are and where this story stands today, because the facts are more explosive than the rhetoric. Nnamdi Kanu is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, a secessionist movement the Nigerian government proscribed as a terrorist organization in 2017. His legal history in Nigeria is long and, to put it carefully, irregular. He was first arrested in 2015 on charges of treasonable felony and terrorism. He was granted bail in 2017. He went abroad. He did not return. In June 2021, he was rearrested in Nairobi, Kenya, and brought back to Nigeria in an operation his lawyers immediately described as extraordinary rendition. That is, an extrajudicial transfer across international borders without following Kenya's legal process. That characterization was not just the opinion of Kanu's team. In 2022, Nigeria's own Court of Appeal ruled, in its own words, that Kanu's rendition was unlawful and constituted an egregious violation of international law. The court ordered his release. The federal government appealed that order to the Supreme Court. While that appeal was still pending, a different judge, Justice James Omotosho of the Federal High Court in Abuja, took up a fresh trial. On November 20, 2025, Justice Omotosho convicted Kanu on all 7 counts of terrorism. He sentenced him to life imprisonment. Within 24 hours, the Department of State Security transferred Kanu to Sokoto Correctional Center, a facility over 700 kilometers from Abuja, from his lawyers and the court where his fate must now be decided. In January 2026, Kanu personally signed and filed a motion requesting transfer to a facility closer to Abuja, arguing that his constitutional right of appeal was effectively being sabotaged by the distance. Justice Omotosho struck out that motion, ruling it incompetent. As of June 7, 2026, Nnamdi Kanu is in Sokoto Prison. His appeal is at the Court of Appeal, and this week, IPOB issued a statement claiming the Nigerian government's own cross-appeal has effectively admitted that Justice Omotosho's court lacked jurisdiction to convict him in the first place. That is a live, active legal controversy, not a fringe claim. Now, let us turn to Sheikh Ahmad Abubakar Gumi. Sheikh Ahmad Abubakar Gumi is a Kaduna-based Islamic scholar, the Mufti of the Sultan Bello Central Mosque, and a figure with documented access to armed groups operating in Nigeria's northwest, the same groups whose kidnappings, mass murders, and village burnings have displaced hundreds of thousands of Nigerians and made large parts of Zamfara, Katsina, and Sokoto states uninhabitable. Since at least 2021, Gumi has made repeated public visits to bandit camps in Kaduna, Niger, and Zamfara states. He has publicly advocated for amnesty for these groups. He has argued that government military operations are counterproductive. As recently as May 23, 2026, 2 weeks ago, he denied being a bandit sympathizer, threatened journalists with legal action, and simultaneously renewed his call for the federal government to offer formal amnesty to armed groups responsible for mass abduction. On Christmas Day 2025, the United States conducted 16 precision strikes on ISIS-linked militant camps in Sokoto State in a joint operation with the Nigerian government. Gumi responded by labeling Nigerians who supported the strikes stupid, calling President Trump's hands bloodstained, and urging the Nigerian government to halt all military cooperation with the United States and instead seek assistance from China, Turkey, and Pakistan. He was not arrested, he was not questioned, he was not charged. As of today, Sheikh Ahmad Abubakar Gumi has never been charged with any terrorism-related offense by any Nigerian court. Hold that contrast in your mind. We are going to need it. But to understand why this is happening, and not just that it is happening, we need to go one layer deeper. Because the answer is not simply that the Nigerian government is corrupt. It is more specific than that, and more disturbing. Here is something that almost nobody is saying out loud. The legal standard used to convict Nnamdi Kanu could, on its face, apply equally to Sheikh Ahmad Gumi. Let us be precise about why. Nigeria's Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022 is a broad and powerful piece of legislation. It criminalizes not only the commission of terrorist acts, but also the financing, support, encouragement, and promotion of terrorism. Under this act, the minimum sentence for promoting or supporting terrorist activities is 20 years imprisonment. A human rights lawyer, Deji Adeyanyo, said publicly in May 2026, after reviewing the act, that Gumi's repeated public defense of armed bandits and his rhetoric that appears to rationalize their violence could, on the same legal theory, attract prosecution under the same provisions used against Kanu. Now, Gumi disputes this characterization entirely. His position is that he has been misrepresented. He says his engagements with armed groups were conducted with the knowledge of Nigerian security agencies, that police and military representatives accompanied him on his forest visits. In March 2026, he stated publicly that the Nigerian government knows every terrorist by name and by location. He argues that his method is dialogue, not support. These are contested claims. They deserve examination, and we will examine them in the counter-argument section. But for now, note the institutional architecture. The Attorney General of the Federation is the Chief Law Officer of the Federation. The decision to prosecute or not prosecute ultimately travels through that office. During the period that Kanu was rearrested, retried, and convicted, the same federal executive controlled both prosecutorial priorities and the security apparatus. The same government that sent DSS officers to Kanu's trial in Abuja also had full knowledge of Gumi's public activities. And here is where the constitutional question becomes impossible to ignore. Section 36(1) of the 1999 Constitution guarantees the right to fair hearing. Section 42(1) guarantees freedom from discrimination, and Section 15(2), often overlooked, speaks directly to the obligation of the Nigerian state to ensure equal opportunity to all citizens in the allocation of rights, responsibilities, and public goods. Nigeria's constitution does not create a two-track justice system. Nigerian law does not authorize selective enforcement based on region, ethnicity, or religion. But what we are witnessing is a prosecutorial pattern so consistent, so sustained, and so disproportionate in its application across ethnic and regional lines that it is functioning like a two-track system, whether or not that is its stated design. Who are the figures in Nigeria who have faced terrorism charges, lengthy pre-trial detention, and the full force of the state's legal machinery in recent years? Overwhelmingly, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly, they come from the Southeast and South-South. Who are the figures whose public advocacy for violent groups, whose documented contact with armed militias, and whose statements that undermine federal security operations have faced no prosecution at all? Look at where they come from. Look at where their support base is concentrated. This is not analysis by coincidence. This is a structural observation, and it demands a structural explanation, not a tribal one, but an institutional one. Because the question is not whether Nnamdi Kanu is innocent. A court has found him guilty, and his appeal is live. The question is whether that court and the prosecutorial process that brought him there operated with the same standard it would apply to any other Nigerian, regardless of language, religion, or constituency. And the answer to that question is not found in the courtroom alone. It is found in the room where political calculations are made, in the map of 2027, and in the calculations of those who benefit from keeping this inequality intact. Let us be direct about the political geography of this story. Nnamdi Kanu's base is the Southeast, Igbo Nigeria, a zone of 5 states that since 2019 has become increasingly politically marginalized at the federal level. The Southeast is the only geopolitical zone in Nigeria that has never produced a president or vice president. After Kanu's rearrest, after his conviction, Southeast governors have walked a careful tightrope, publicly calling for his release while privately calculating whether their political futures are better served by cooperating with Abuja or confronting it. Ohanaeze Ndigwu alleged as recently as 2024 that Southeast governors and Igbo elites were deliberately prolonging Kanu's detention until after 2027, using his case as a bargaining chip to extract concessions and appointments from the Tinubu administration. Whether you accept that specific claim or not, the underlying dynamic it describes is real. Kanu's case is a political asset for multiple actors simultaneously. For the federal government, keeping Kanu in Sokoto Prison is a signal to the Southeast, to armed groups in the region, and to foreign observers that the state will pursue secessionism to its legal conclusion. It satisfies a particular narrative about Nigeria's territorial integrity. For Southeast political elites, Kanu's case is leverage. As long as he is imprisoned, they have a grievance to trade. The moment he is released, through pardon, through appeal, through political negotiation, they lose that card. For the 2027 election, the Southeast bloc matters. It is not the largest electoral bloc, but in a tight election, it can be decisive. The Tinubu administration needs Southeast votes. President Tinubu has not publicly moved to pardon Kanu. He has not publicly opposed it. He has maintained strategic ambiguity on the question, leaving the door open for a political solution while not committing to one. Now, look at Gumi's political geography. His constituency is the Northwest, Nigeria's largest demographic zone by population and by electoral weight. The Northwest delivered decisive votes in 2023. It will be crucial again in 2027. Gumi's support base among religious conservatives in Kaduna, Kano, Katsina, Zamfara, and Sokoto states is not negligible. More importantly, his network, whatever its nature, gives him access to armed groups whose cooperation or whose aggression can determine conditions on the ground in states that matter enormously to any federal government seeking re-election. In practical terms, prosecuting Gumi carries political costs that prosecuting Kanu does not. This is not a moral calculation, it's a cold electoral one, and Nigerian federal governments have consistently made that calculation in the same direction. What does Gumi's decision to call the December 2025 U.S. airstrikes in Sokoto an act of terror while simultaneously calling for Nigeria to align with China, Turkey, and Pakistan signal? At minimum, it signals that Gumi has positioned himself as a voice of Northwest sovereignty and Islamic assertion against external intervention.
That positioning is popular in his constituency. It also means that prosecuting him after those statements would be read in northern Nigeria as the federal government suppressing Muslim leadership at the behest of American pressure. The political cost is enormous, and so the prosecution does not happen. What about the U.S. Congress resolution of May 22, 2026? The resolution, H-Res 1321, introduced by Congressman John James, called on the Nigerian government to ensure Kanu's legal proceedings comply with its constitutional obligations and international human rights commitments. It cited the July 2022 opinion of the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which found that Kanu's detention violated international human rights law and called for his release. It also cited concerns from Kenyan courts, legal observers, and human rights organizations about the rendition process. That resolution landed in Abuja like a stone in still water. It internationalizes Kanu's case at precisely the moment when Nigeria needs favorable relations with Washington, given the backdrop of the December 2025 U.S. airstrikes, visa restrictions on Nigerians, and Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. The Tinubu administration is navigating extremely compressed political space, placate the Southeast enough to win some of its votes, manage the Northwest without alienating its power structures, and now respond to direct U.S. congressional attention on a case that exposes the selective application of Nigerian law. This is the 2027 calculus, and the Gumi-Kanu contrast sits at the precise intersection of all of it. Now, if what you just heard challenged what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes it everything.
Let us move from the political to the structural, to what this pattern does to Nigeria as a country, not just as an election cycle. The first and most serious consequence is what legal scholars call delegitimization of the rule of law. When citizens observe that the same statute is applied with maximum force to certain communities and with zero force to others, the rational conclusion is not that the law is sovereign, it is that power is sovereign. Once that conclusion takes hold widely enough, it corrodes every other institution that depends on public trust: courts, elections, police, tax compliance, civic participation. In the Southeast, that corrosion is already deep. The persistence of sit-at-home orders in parts of Igbo-speaking states, orders that continue to paralyze economic activity even after Kanu's conviction, is a direct function of the belief among a significant portion of Southeast citizens that the Nigerian state is not a neutral referee. You may disagree with that belief, but its consequences are entirely real. Lost school days, closed markets, suppressed investment, compounding poverty. In the Northwest, the consequences run in a different but equally dangerous direction. If Gumi is correct that the Nigerian government knows every terrorist by name and location, and if the government's response to that claim is silence rather than denial, then what message does that send to the millions of Nigerians in Zamfara, Katsina, and Sokoto states who have lost family members, farms, and entire villages to bandits? It says, your government has made a choice about which lives to protect. There is also an economic dimension. Nigeria's security situation directly affects investment. The Northwest's agricultural heartland has been effectively destroyed by years of banditry that was met with neither sustained military success nor any credible non-kinetic strategy. The loss to Nigeria's food security and rural economy runs into hundreds of billions of naira. Meanwhile, every month that the Southeast remains under the psychological weight of sit-at-home compliance, driven by a political crisis that successive governments have failed to resolve, is a month of stunted economic output in one of Nigeria's most commercially dynamic zones. There is a harder point to make, and it must be made plainly. When the state prosecutes a man for broadcasting secessionist content while leaving uncharged a man who publicly visited armed camps, advocated amnesty for mass murderers, and called U.S. counter-terrorism strikes an act of terrorism, the message to every Nigerian watching is this: the category of terrorism in Nigeria is applied not by the facts of a case, but by the identity of the accused.
That message, once internalized, is extraordinarily difficult to undo. The international dimension of this story is no longer peripheral. It is central. The United States Congress's resolution of May 22, 2026 is not symbolic noise. It is a formal congressional expression of concern about due process in a member nation of the UN, a major U.S. security partner, and an African democratic anchor. When the U.S. Congress cites a UN working group finding that a Nigerian citizen's detention violated international law and does so while simultaneously conducting military operations on Nigerian soil, it is creating a direct line of accountability that Nigerian authorities cannot simply ignore. The Saudi Arabia angle adds another dimension entirely. In May 2025, Sheikh Gumi was denied entry into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, reportedly banned from Hajj attendance despite holding a valid visa. Anonymous Saudi officials cited security concerns. The last time Gumi was in Mecca, in 2010, he was detained for over 6 months over alleged connections to Umar Faruk Abdul Muttalab, the Nigerian citizen convicted in the United States for the Christmas Day underwear bomb plot. That detention ended when the Nigerian government under Vice President Nnamdi Kanu expended diplomatic capital to secure his release. Let that stand for a moment. Saudi Arabia, the heartland of global Sunni Islam and a country not known for overreaction on security questions, has twice in 15 years found cause to take formal action against Gumi. Nigeria has taken none. What does this mean for Nigeria's international standing? It means that the inconsistency visible to ordinary Nigerians scrolling social media is also visible to foreign governments, international courts, and diplomatic missions. The gap between how Nigeria prosecutes southern agitators and how it treats northern power brokers is no longer a domestic conversation. It is being read internationally as a governance deficit, and in the current environment where Nigeria needs foreign investment, U.S. security cooperation, and credibility in multilateral forums, that deficit has a price. For Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly in the United Kingdom, which has raised the question of Kanu's rights as a British citizen, and in the United States, where the congressional resolution was introduced, this story lands as confirmation of what many already believe, that Nigerian institutions do not function as advertised, and that proximity to power determines survival. Let us steelman the strongest arguments on the other side, because intellectual honesty demands it. The most serious argument in defense of the government's treatment of these two cases differently is this: Nnamdi Kanu and Sheikh Gumi are not similarly situated in law. Kanu was the leader of a formally proscribed organization. IPOB was designated a terrorist group by a Nigerian court in 2017. Kanu was convicted not merely for speech, but for directing operational activities, including, according to Justice Omotosho's judgment, issuing threats that enforced sit-at-home compliance through fear and coercion. The prosecution's case was that Kanu's broadcasts caused measurable violence, not merely controversy. Gumi, by contrast, was conducting, or claims to have been conducting, mediation activities with the knowledge and participation of Nigerian security agencies. He has repeatedly stated that police and military representatives accompanied his forest visits. If that claim is true, then the government's decision not to prosecute him is consistent. It does not prosecute its own agents of policy, however controversial. This is not a trivial distinction. It is the kind of distinction that legal systems are built to make, and it deserves acknowledgement. Now, here is the challenge. The government has never publicly confirmed that Gumi's bandit negotiations were authorized policy. It has not produced records of security agency participation. It has not offered any official account of what Gumi's role was, what it was sanctioned to accomplish, or how it ended. The Minister of Information, Mohammed Idris, said in 2026 that security agencies may reprimand or question anyone whose remarks were deemed reckless, a statement that conspicuously fell short of prosecution or even formal investigation. More fundamentally, the prosecutorial standard applied to Kanu was based on the effects of his speech, not just the words themselves. If effects are the standard, if what matters is whether rhetoric incited or enabled violence, then the villages of Zamfara, the kidnapping victims of Kaduna, the internally displaced communities of Katsina have as much standing to ask about the effects of Gumi's activities as the residents of Imo State have to ask about the effects of Kanu's. The second major misconception circulating on social media is that this analysis is itself an ethnic argument, that saying Kanu is treated worse than Gumi is simply Igbo advocacy in analytical clothing. This is wrong, and it is important to say why. This analysis does not claim that Kanu is innocent or that his conviction should be overturned. It claims that the process by which Kanu was convicted was irregular, a position held not by Igbo activists, but by Nigeria's own Court of Appeal in 2022, by the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and now, implicitly, by the US Congress. These are not ethnic institutions. It also does not claim that Gumi is guilty of terrorism. It claims that there is a publicly documented, publicly acknowledged disparity in how Nigerian law has been applied to two men accused of related categories of offense, and that this disparity falls along ethnic and religious lines in a way that demands explanation, not dismissal. What this means for Nigeria's democratic trajectory is direct. A democracy that applies its most coercive laws selectively will eventually find that those laws lose their legitimacy entirely, not just with the communities they are most heavily applied against, but with everyone who can see clearly enough to notice the pattern. So where does this go from here? Because the next 60 to 90 days are not a waiting game, they are a decision point. And the decisions being made right now in Abuja will determine whether this story ends in a courtroom or somewhere much more consequential.
3 things to watch and 3 scenarios to think through. First, Kanu's appeal. The brief of argument was filed at the Court of Appeal in Abuja on June 5, 2026. The Nigerian government has also filed a cross-appeal. According to IPOB statement, the government's cross-appeal may have inadvertently conceded that Justice Omotosho lacked jurisdiction, a claim the government has not confirmed but has also not publicly rebutted. If the Court of Appeal finds merit in the jurisdictional argument, it could vacate the entire conviction, not reduce it, not modify it, vacate it entirely. That outcome would trigger an immediate political crisis. The federal government would face simultaneous pressure from southeast constituencies demanding Kanu's release, from northern constituencies demanding accountability for the rendition, and from international partners asking why a man whose detention was found to be internationally unlawful was convicted rather than released. Watch the Court of Appeal. Its scheduling of this case will tell you whether the judiciary is moving at the speed of law or at the speed of politics. Second, Gumi and the prosecution question. As of today, no charge has been filed against Gumi, but the domestic and international pressure is building in a direction that has no easy escape. Saudi Arabia has banned him. The US airstrikes removed from the conversation the argument that Gumi's network is purely a negotiating asset. If the US and Nigerian government were bombing those camps in December 2025, the implicit admission is that those camps were not being managed into peace. Under what conditions might Gumi face formal legal scrutiny? Only if the Tinubu administration decides that the political cost of protecting him exceeds the political cost of confronting him. That calculation does not yet exist, but every month of rising insecurity in the Northwest makes it slightly more possible. The third, the 2027 variable. Both the Kanu case and the Gumi case will be live political questions when Nigerians go to the polls. A pardon for Kanu, executed through the presidential prerogative of mercy, would cost Tinubu very little in the north and could yield significant goodwill in the southeast at a moment when the ruling party is vulnerable. The political logic is there. What is missing is the political courage to execute it in a way that does not look like weakness or capitulation to secessionists. If Tinubu moves toward a pardon or political resolution of Kanu's case in the next 12 months, watch whether it comes alongside any movement on northern insecurity accountability. If it does not, if Kanu is released while Gumi continues uncharged and the Northwest continues burning, the gesture will be read as transactional rather than principled, and it will solve nothing structurally. The 12-month picture. This remains an open legal and political wound.
The Court of Appeal case will likely run through late 2026 into early 2027. The closer it gets to the election, the harder it becomes for any actor to make a principled decision uncontaminated by electoral calculation. The three-year picture. If the inequality embedded in this story is not addressed at the level of prosecutorial policy, not just in these two cases but as a stated federal commitment to equal enforcement, Nigeria's counter-terrorism architecture will continue to be seen by a significant portion of its own population as a weapon of ethnic management rather than a shield of national security. That perception, sustained over time, does not produce peace. It produces deeper fracture. We began with a single question. Is Nigerian law the same law for every Nigerian? Let me answer it directly. On the available facts, not on emotion, not on tribal sentiment, but on the documented record of how Nigeria's legal institutions have operated, the answer is not yet. Not consistently, not in a way that any credible court, any independent legal observer, or any foreign government looking at these two cases side by side would describe as equal. That is not an indictment of every Nigerian institution. It is not a conclusion that Kanu is innocent or Gumi is guilty. It is a statement about a pattern that Nigeria's own courts have documented, that the United Nations has documented, and that the United States Congress felt compelled to address 5 days ago. The measured conclusion is this. The Kanu-Gumi disparity is not an accident of jurisprudence. It is the output of a political system that has not yet decided that equal application of the law is worth the cost of enforcing it equally. Until that decision is made at the level of prosecutorial policy, not just individual courts, every Nigerian, regardless of region or religion, has reason to distrust the system's ability to protect them when it is inconvenient to do so. That is not a southern conclusion. That is not a northern conclusion. It is a Nigerian one. There is one thread I am deliberately leaving open because in the coming weeks, the Court of Appeal in Abuja will make a decision that could reshape this entire story, and whether that decision is made on the merits of the law or on the merits of the moment will tell us more about the state of Nigerian justice than any commentary can. Watch that courtroom, not the politicians, the courtroom. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.